Hi, everyone. So glad you're here. I'm Dr. Marsha Gordon, President and CEO of the Business Council of Westchester. And honestly, I just love when a Monday morning starts like this, with people who actually want to show up and learn together. That says a lot about you. The Business Council of Westchester has been the heartbeat of the Westchester business community for decades. We bring together everyone from Fortune 500 companies to the small business owner who's wearing every hat in the building. And what binds us all is a belief that when we invest in each other, everybody wins. That's exactly why our partnership with BLI feels so right to me, because balancing life's issues gets something that the best leaders already know, that leadership isn't just about strategy and results. It's about people. It's about creating environments where people feel seen, supported, and set up to do their best work. That's what BLI brings to every organization they work with. And frankly, it's what we've tried to bring to the Business Council of Westchester every single day. Someone once described compassionate leadership to me as the ability to hold high standards and deep humanity at the same time. And I thought, yes, that's exactly it. You don't have to choose between being driven and being kind. The best leaders I know are both. So I'm genuinely excited and generally excited for this conversation today. What BCW and BLI are building together is rooted in community, real community. And I think you're going to walk away from this feeling energized and equipped. And that brings me to Wendy Wollner, CEO of BLI, whose leadership reflects so much of what we value at the Business Council of Westchester. Wendy understands that strong organizations are built not just through strategy and performance, but by creating cultures where people feel empowered, supported, and connected. So Wendy, I'm going to let you take it from here.
Awesome. Thank you. So hit that chat button. Come on in my living room. We're going to run it a little differently than some of your other webs where the questions, comments are open right from the beginning. So you'll see Kai, who's co-hosting with me. We'll send you off notes. But, for a second, I'm just going to acknowledge, a lot of what I've learned for 30 years of this topic and where we are today is from BCW and from Marsha. So I thought I would just start, Marsha, with a quick Marsha story that she doesn't know. We didn't plan any of this. Are you good with that? Yes. So many of you have been at a BCW event, and just when Marsha gets up on stage and everybody's talking and there's a lot of fervor going on, and you guys know that in the minute that Marsha says, I'm going to start, what happens to the audience, Marsha?
They listen to me. They
listen.
quiet down.
Yes. There's a little fear. A teeny bit of fear. So I really want to be clear about what we're going to talk about today and where I think sometimes we get a little confused and where we need maybe a little tweaking. Somebody's saying Marsha commands the room. I really want to start right off with what compassionate leaders do is very clear. And it's very performance driven. And there's a little confusion in the marketplace and in business about what compassion is and what it's not. So we're going to take a deep dive into that. I always self-invite your journey, where you are, where you want to be, how you're moving forward, because that's really what today is about. Now, today's a different workplace. You're talking about some really recent studies that show 77% of the people are saying, we just we're having a hard time. And I jokingly say the other 23% just didn't pay any attention to the survey. I think the vast majority of us on a Monday morning wake up with Monday or the Sunday scaries, and it really becomes difficult to get jobs done today. And one of the focal points for today is always focusing on the people that we want to retain in our lives. And this is true as a compassionate parent. I'm a pretty recent grandmother. I have an 18-month-old. I want to be a compassionate grandmother, but I also want to raise a grandchild or help raise a grandchild that has some idea of what the world is and how we exist in the world. And so I really want you to think about today where you are on the scale. If you were to measure yourself, and I put at the bottom a really telling story. A number of years ago, when I really started to figure out how I could really lead this company in a really good, compassionate way, one of our trainers, who is known to be incredibly difficult, really challenging, but a really big asset to the team, was yelling and yelling at an account manager. Now, we can all agree that is so inappropriate. Yelling at work should never happen. But today we're going to do the real world. Yelling at work does sometimes happen, and losing control of our emotions, it does sometimes happen. And what a compassionate leader does, and right from the beginning, is able to self-correct and say, okay, I don't like this behavior, but I'm wondering why the behavior is happening. What is going on? What do I need to know? So one of the things that's a theme throughout our time together is, what is the probing question? So I'm going to invite you into a self-awareness. I'm going to invite you to participate as much as you want to. So where are you on just the reality of, like, when someone does act inappropriately, what grade would you give yourself? A, B, C, D, or F? What grade would you give yourself on redirecting to why the behavior is happening? What do you think? And you can send that comment just to us. You can keep it totally confidential. But what grade would you give yourself on those probing questions? Go for it. A, B, C, D, or F? Okay, so I really appreciate, depends on the kind of day I'm having. I love that. So we got lots of B's and C's coming in. I think that's honest that people are saying, oh, I don't like conflict, B minus. And for those who are not answering, I'd love to know why not. Like, where are you that you're not participating? That's also super important feedback, because when our time together, okay, we've got an A minus, but we've got mostly B's and C's. So if you are coming in late is great. Welcome to the living room. I think one of the tool bags, and I always like the classes to have real takeaways, is to be more comfortable with the probing questions. And in this situation, training my team to say, how can we help? What's going on? We did end up, unfortunately, finding out that this trainer had stage 4 cancer. He had not even told his family yet. And, unfortunately did not survive the cancer. And it became part of the process to understanding how complicated lives are. So asking probing questions, which, by the way, just fun fact, in Denmark is taught in kindergarten. Denmark teaches character. It's as important as reading, writing, and arithmetic. So it's one of our role models when we study global compassion leadership. And we think, well, have we taken a class on compassionate question asking? Probably not. It's really important, and I probably will be a little redundant about this because I get this a lot in my work, is people who know me, and many of you on the call do know me, and you're part of our team, or you're part of the BCW family, which I love. I'm not really known for softness. That's not, I don't think, how people would describe. They will often use a word that's very debatable in business community, and that's fierce, which sometimes has a both connotations, but it's really a strategic decision to understand the entire person and to say, I see more for you. And UNC has done interesting studies on neurologically. I'm happy about this because when I first started studying this, we said, oh, you get old when you're 70. And then they said, well, that's ridiculous. Then it was 80. And now actually it's 100. So we actually know that until 100, neurologically, we get to change. Our brain still processes. It can change. There are many other factors, of course, Alzheimer's and dementia, which we need to factor in. But I really, really want you to walk away saying that there are 4 components. The first one is how attuned you are to what's going on in the room. What do you notice? We were talking about this on my social media. Like, if you have somebody in your life who's recently gained a substantial amount of weight, or has noticeably been very tired, or noticeably had a different behavior, I want you to give yourself another grade. How comfortable are you saying, I just want to know if you're okay? We call that a check-in. What grade do you give yourselves on a check-in? How often do you do a check-in? Okay, so I think it's interesting. A check-in is really important in that it establishes time for you to really figure out what is going right and what's not going right. And so when we look at this, that I'm going to be known as a person who absolutely delivers and always understands that I need to check in. So the first time you check in with someone, I can guarantee you it's not going to happen. The second time, the third time, people are actually going to say, wait a minute, maybe Wendy really cares about this. So for most people, the seeing piece of it is the hardest piece. Once we get the seeing piece, once we actually can see that there's more going on, the rest of it actually comes much more natural. Most of the time, we're able to say, hey, I can see something that you can't see. So let me stop there for a second. Let me look at the chats. How are we doing? How relevant is this? Is this what you thought? I love the comment. I check in with tons of friends and family members regularly. And so, however old we are, we're able to check in on younger, older, what's going on. And I think it's important to say, news events can play a big role into what's going on. Very often I'll have to stop. Of course, we had a horrible thing happen with a temple last week in Michigan. And so sometimes it's a check-in with the team. Did this affect your life? How are you feeling about this? Do we need to stop and acknowledge what is happening, not just in our own little world, but outside in the big world? Yep. The staff wants to know that they've been seen and heard without judgment. And then we're really able to say, okay, let's talk about it. The average person goes through about 168 emotions a day. And yes, there are repeats in there, but we really only acknowledge 2 or 3. So the more sophisticated you get, the more you're going to understand the difference between joy and ecstasy. And by the way, ecstasy, let's just talk about the emotion of ecstatic for a minute. That's actually when we make the most money. Our organizations thrive and they become the most profitable. That's true even for not-for-profits. I help work with a not-for-profit and we need money to operate when we're ecstatic about our work. So, toughest question. How many of you are feeling ecstatic on this Monday morning? Or when's the last time you felt ecstatic? I love it. We've gotten every day. It's been a while. Wednesday, hump day we get. What else? It's great to keep a little book about like what has really made you ecstatic. I know Sloan Kettering did an interesting study that showed just planning a vacation can really drive that part of our brain. We don't even actually have to go on the vacation, although I love going on vacations and traveling. Love going with the BCW. We're heading off to Sicily in a few weeks. So my goal for today is give you food for thought. Oh, now that's interesting. I'd be ecstatic if. So we call those conditional comments. I would be ecstatic if. And I love that comment. I want to talk about that comment for a minute. That is one of the key, really important parts of leadership. One of the things that's so important in leadership is to live in the world of when. Many of you know I have a 90-year-old mother that I'm incredibly close with. And one of the biggest things I've learned is it's not if my mother dies, it's when she dies. How much am I living in a world of I'm prepared? It's not if I lose a client. I remember a long time ago, when I started out, IBM was my biggest client. I was there maybe more than 5 times a week. And I kept saying to my dad, this is great. I have IBM, everything's good. And he said, no, because that's, if something happens with IBM, what will happen to be alive? So I love the idea that compassionate leaders, they're super prepared. They're like, you know what? Bring it on. I got this. So that's a really great point to say, like, can I handle what might happen? Can I get excited about it? Can I feel good? Can I learn about it? And I will stop here and say, because this is a co-sponsor, for me, personally, being part of the community at BCW has been exactly that. It's a place for me to say, I'm worried about this. I'm not prepared for this. Who in this community can help me prepare my when statement? So for those of you who are in the community, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And for those of you who are joining, it's really great to be able to say, what community do you have to be part of? And ask yourself, are there enough people in your community to help you? Permissive leadership should sound a little like permissive parenting. And there's a little bit of a very deliberate bias here that we are looking at direct. Radical honesty is summing up this whole slide. Being able to tell someone exactly how you feel and what your worries and concerns are as a leader. There should never be any surprises on your team. So let me just stop there for a second. How do you feel about that comment? What do you think about that? Where do you think we are in business today? Oh, someone's finding out they're having another baby a few months ago. That's the if when. How do you feel? Do you feel that you know what the year might bring to the best of your organization's ability? Do you feel part of the decision making? What do you think? Yes, no, maybe, I'm not sure. So I think you're probably 50-50. We're affected by politics, and I absolutely agree that we have to be in the know about what's going on in our world. Matter of fact, super important, local elections, local make a big difference in the big picture for many of us. I do think that folks are uncomfortable. Showing vulnerability. I'm not the biggest Brene Brown fan. You'll see at the end, I put my personal list. If you love her, that's great. I personally love business leaders who've built businesses. I think that, I'll own this comment. I don't think anyone ever feels comfortable sharing. I don't think that's something that people wake up saying, wow, I want to share this part of my life. But I do think what's really important to understand with radical honesty is that it does work both ways. And this is really this idea of I definitely want people to feel comfortable coming to me. And I also want to share with them. It's a two-way street. It does get easier. It is a muscle. I totally agree with that. Yeah, I think that there's a rebranding about radical honesty being insensitive. I think there's an unpacking. I have one of my teammates that we say it takes a lot of time. Communication and radical honesty is time. It's not done once in a while. It's done on a regular basis over a period of time. And it sounds like this. I'm worried. I'm concerned. I'm anxious. This is not working. This is what's going to happen if it doesn't turn around. I need you to hear me say. And I do think we have to rebrand that the conversation about holding people accountable is a key part of being compassionate. My famous quote is, I do make definite decisions. And if you're part of the BLI team, it's regular, like, well, that was yesterday. We're readjusting today. The Wall Street Journal says the key to success for 2026 is agility. How quickly can you readjust to today? People may think being honest has implications. I totally agree with that. I started my career in what is today HR, and we absolutely are very nervous about saying the wrong thing, about getting into trouble. I say this with my radical honesty. There are a lot of excuses to not hold people accountable. It's really hard. So let's dive into that. What happens when we don't hold people accountable and we don't act in a compassionate way? You may lose someone in today's market. It's possible that they'll stay there, but quiet quitting, which means I'm going to do the bare minimum or less. I don't really care. I'm not vested. Big part of what is happening. They leave, which is called micro exits, which means I'm still looking. My feelers are out. I'm not quiet quitting. I'm actually doing my job, but I'm basically going to be out of here in a year. Conflict avoidance. Everybody says what they like. So I would love to challenge you to say, even on this call, how comfortable are you finishing? Well, Wendy, I wish you would. I'm hoping that how could you fill in that sentence to show me that you feel comfortable giving some constructive feedback? Let's give you a minute to try it. And we're super uncomfortable with silence, by the way, but we have time. I'm going to give you a full minute to think. I'm hoping that this seminar does something. Fill in the blank. I wish that cannot be perfect. There are many things that I could do differently. Or if you're multitasking, I wish I could see everyone. Good, interesting point. We have some more coming up, so maybe we can take that feedback. Encourage courage to have hard conversations with more time in a day. I love, for sure. Courage is a really interesting, really courageous leadership, of course, goes hand in hand with compassionate and radical honesty. I think that's a really interesting point to ask yourself about how much do you love risk? And you get some feedback with your own self now about, I didn't really want to write something in, or I don't feel comfortable doing that. I think that's a lot of what I'm looking for is just a really temperature. Like, how are we doing on these topics? And then of course, at the end, you have people that are just somewhere else and they're not really there. I think this is one of the toughest classes. People are writing in, it's tough. People stop raising problems. And let me tell you that when we stop raising problems, I'm going to quote Lou Gerstner. I mentioned IBM. When I was there, I was lucky enough to meet him, and he was being interviewed by the Harvard Business Review, and I happened to be in the audience. And he said something. I mean, I'm obviously dating myself 20 years ago, but they asked Lou Gerstner, the CEO of IBM, what he was worried about, and he said, without blinking an eye, he said, becoming complacent. When we stop caring, when we say we're good enough, we create a safe zone when we just speak freely by sharing yourself first, by really sharing your fears, your worries, your concerns, and what your expectations are. How we can foster psychological safety. What's interesting about psychological safety, I thought a lot about that. I'm going to give you a good amount of homework at the end. And it doesn't, I want to acknowledge many of you are writing in that this is so hard and we don't really do that. I do agree. I think we're in a pivotal time where you're seeing a lot of organizations. Many of them are clients of ours that are closing, that are going out of business. And when we really look at, why, I have to say most experts will say culture, business culture. The culture is what's sustainability. I'm going to tell you, BLI has not always had great years, but I've never thought about it in anything other than we're here for the long term. When I was at Goldman Sachs in their business program, my cohort of 17 businesses, and I don't say this proudly, I say this very sad, I'm the only business left standing. And one of the things that I think is really important is I spend a lot of time on this. I do not always get it right. A lot of my staff is here and they're probably laughing because we certainly have some times where it's very messy, but it's a work in progress. What do you think of how systematic perspective fits into the organizational health? I think what's interesting about systems and systematic perspectives is it's not agile enough for today's marketplace. It's not agile enough to add in AI. Yes, this presentation had a base of AI, for sure. AI is a big part. I use 5 different AIs to learn from. That's certainly what my professor teaches me, but then it has a lot of Wendy. So when we're talking about organizational health today, the one thing we know that cannot be replaced is compassion and how we're feeling. AI cannot do that. It's too complicated for it. Whether it will ever, I don't know. I've heard this 50% of all businesses are gone in 5 years. I think agility is a lot. And so this is a slide that tends to do very well because it gives you real tools, right? Not how the project is, but how are you doing with the project? How are you feeling? What's the hardest thing? I love asking the question, what's your biggest concern? What is your worry? What could happen? What do you think of the Teen Pulse ritual? It's interesting. It's a good question. So thank you for asking it. There's a lot of, generic books out there, about ways to do things. And if it works for you, the Teen Pulse ritual, that idea, I put it as part of a team, right? It's part of what works for you. I do like silence. When I was working with Columbia University, they did fascinating research about silence. So I'll just use a second for you. So I'm going to time just 1 minute to ask you how you're feeling about starting this week. So how's everyone feeling about starting this week? That was 1 minute. How did that 1 minute feel to people? I'm just curious. Long time, little time. How'd you feel about it? Too long. So I think I'll tell a pretty personal story here. Some of you know that I was divorced pretty early on. My children were very young. They were 5, 6, and 8. And I used to regularly do this Teen Pulse ritual and ask them how they were feeling, how they were doing, what life was like for them. And I'm a fast. I move pretty quickly. And I started studying this idea of silence and a 2-minute pause. And I remember after a few years asking the question, my middle and my young son would answer right away. My older son, who happens to be a surgeon, he really never did. He never answered until I allowed him enough time to answer. And then I remember the day, it was 5 or 6 years after I got divorced. And I said, so how are we doing? How's the divorce feeling? And I waited and he answered. And I was like, wow, I'm so grateful that you answered. And he processed it and said, but you've never really asked me before. When we ask something and we don't always give people the time to answer, it's not their fault. We have to process that. I love a daughter of two shrinks, silence as someone gathers their thoughts. Whether we do it enough in business, that's something for you to think about. So what I really love is you make this your own. You do your deep dive, into it and say, what works for us and is it working for the organization? I love real-time client feedback. So we will ask our clients, how are we doing? Are we meeting your needs? Not once in a blue moon, almost to the point where sometimes they laugh and write back. But because we have a complicated business model, which so many of you do, and we have so many different clients with so many different needs, we really need to reprioritize constantly. So let's look at a business case for today. Gallup, which is probably one of the most, the best related business sources, says you're going to increase your profitability by 21% with high employee engagement. That means high conflict, though. High employee engagement is directly related to, can I argue about something? Do I feel safe enough to disagree? Do I have another point of view? Do I have somebody that cares enough about me to say, yeah, no, that's not going to work? That's when you really create the psychological safety. Now, I want to make this real. It doesn't mean that the first time that somebody calls me out in a staff meeting that I'm like, yay, let's make this very real. Of course, I have to think about it. I have to process it. I'll take my dog for a walk. I will regroup. We have to readjust. We have to really think about it. I'll explain different things. I'll look at contracts. I mean, there's so many different layers that go into it. But what I'm always grateful as is they were engaged in the conversation. The other thing that I think is very important is that we are in a country in a world where we see things so differently. I could use any hot topic today and say one of the most important things I've learned, and I'm grateful that I've been able to travel so much and understand the perspective. I was in West Africa a few months ago, and there were many times on this tour that I was the only white person in the country. And on the tour and in the group or at the restaurant or wherever I was at. And I thought, wow, this is a really interesting experience. And it changed my entire outlook at how someone might feel. So I would encourage you to think about any of the topics that are very hot in topics, and I'll mention some of them today that are really important ones for you to say, how are you engaged in the conversation? We want to have total engagement in a way, because the ultimate goal here is we should be able to talk to anybody about anything and shake our hands. That is the goal about compassionate workplace. We don't have to agree with one another, but we definitely need to be able to say, can I explain something to you? Can I understand your point of view? Can we get together so that I can know where you're coming from? The reduction in turnover, I'm going to be radically honest here. I do a lot of executive coaching, and I can tell you that in the last 2 years, the number one issue has been that they have lost the people that they couldn't afford to lose. The turnover has hit them with their higher performers. The turnover has hit them with the people that were driving the success in the organization. And so we really want to be clear to keep everybody, but focusing on the high performers. And I have to tell you, very often the high performers are not always the one, they get underneath the radar. We're not developing that next talent. So let's think a little bit. Think about a leader who showed you compassion. I have probably the best story here, the Westchester story. Are you ready for story time? Say me or not me. Who would like to hear another story? Come on, I need to know. Should I tell a story? Are we ready for another story? Thank you. So I went to a Greenberg Central 7 in Hartsdale, and I went to Old Tarrytown Road. That school doesn't exist anymore. It's not so far away in Greenberg. And at this particular time in the story, my father was looking for a job, and we were living, on a tight budget, as many families do. And I decided in sixth grade to take the flute. So I went home, embarrassingly nagged my parents. I want a flute. I want a flute. I want a flute. And I think about this now. They ended up buying me a used flute, and I was in the band for about a month when my band teacher, Mr. Gerard, asked me to stay after class. And he said to me, we would love to make you the announcer of the band. The announcer of the band. Me, the announcer of the band in sixth grade. I'm unbelievably excited. I go home. I tell my mother I'm good at everything. I don't know what to do. They want to make me the announcer. Now, can anybody think about why that's the most compassionate story ever? It changed my life. Anybody want to guess the ending of the story? He didn't say that I was the worst musician that he ever had. I'm totally tone deaf. I didn't actually know that. I wasn't not good at flute. I was really a problem for them in the band. And they sat down and figured out a way to give me a compassionate message that changed my life. I still have my announcer. I should have brought it from the other room. I still have my announcer booklet. I think about that story constantly, about delivering difficult messages. Sixth grade, there isn't time to learn. And it's German, someone's saying, I don't know that I was ever going to be able to do that. But what I will challenge you is to think about someone in your life that thought enough about you to recraft a message, to rethink about potential. I mean, if you think about what I do for a living, I got on that stage and became an announcer of the band. And by the way, continued all the way through. Woodlands was lucky enough to have Mr. Ellington's nephew. He was the jazz ensemble. I was the announcer. I mean, it changed the entire trajectory of my life. I think about that story a lot. I think about delivering messages in a way that says, is there another way for me to craft that? Is there another way for me to deliver something that is authentically 100% true, but yet redirects the person, and set somebody on the right path, that you see something in them that maybe they don't see or they haven't had the courage to see. So I'm hoping that gives you a thought for when you have to deliver the radical messages, why it becomes a better opportunity is a way to repackage it. But I want to be clear here. One thing that I don't do, ever, and I really mean ever, is anything other than authentically share a message. So if you're thinking in your way about lying or the art of BS, I want to be clear here that that's something that a compassionate leader really, really doesn't do. It really opens a can of worms, and in terms of credibility and in terms of, really radical honesty, it can destroy your entire brand. So in this age of those people that are not performing up to their potentials, those people who are telling you they're fine, the people that are telling you it's okay, you want to start thinking and writing, what are the questions? What data do you need? So let's stop for a second. Tell me one of the questions you might ask somebody on your team in your life that you want to know better. What are some questions that you might ask? What are some compelling questions that show you're a compassionate leader? Okay, I love it. What are your current challenges? Perfect, right? What else? What can you do better? What can I do better? What are some goals? I'm going to switch the word goals. And this is just personal to Wendy. I hope we can start talking more about our dreams, our hopes, our aspirations. What are you looking forward to? What's in your life that gets you ecstatic, that brings you joy? How can I help? And that's a really important question. I didn't put this on my reference book, but if you read Sheryl Sandberg's option B, I was not a fan of Lean In. Sorry for those of you who were, but I wasn't. But I do love her book, Option B. I really think it's important because one thing that she talks about is don't ask how you can help unless you are actually willing to show up. Unless you are really willing to show up and get things done. I have visited people in hospitals. I have done things. I really have to stop here and say, Marcia's probably the best role model of that in sending texts or, I'll use a perfect example of something that I love that Marcia does. She often will shout out members on social media. I went here, but this is good too. That is a perfect example of someone who's showing a compassionate, like this is going to matter to that person. What are your best hopes? What do you need from me to make that a reality? Wow. I love that. How can I help make your dreams come true? I think I've done that with one person. How can I support you? And by the way, if they ask for something that you cannot do, which is real, then the answer is, I wish I could do that, but maybe there is a law or maybe there's something that you need to work around and having that honest discussion. I must attend another meeting. Thank you for coming. One thing I want to say about making dreams come true. A typical day at BLI, there are way too many people out sometimes or too often. We have a complicated team. They're all over the place. And one thing we're really clear about with our 800 trainers is, tell us why you need to change your schedule and let's discuss it together, right? Let's understand how we can be compassionate. Let's talk about that. And I can tell you some of the team sometimes says, oh, that's a hard question to ask. I don't feel right asking that. Yep, you're right. The first 20 times you're not going to feel comfortable. The 21st, you will. What I think you're good at, what I think you might be challenging at. That's a good point. Always ask someone if they want to be tagged on social media, if they think it's okay, and do the check-in before. So that's a follow-up. I'm assuming Marcia won't mind me saying your name. That is the extra cherry on the top. I'm not going to assume that because I like something, you like that too. Yeah. Never shout my brother out. He doesn't like it. I also will tell you that number 4 is something, I've been writing a book for forever. And one of the things that we talk about, a lot is regrets. And, if I could name my book anything in the real world, it would be A Life with the Least Regrets. And it would really be a matter of, well, I know this now, and how would it change something I did before? So I will tell you that self-reflection is a very, very big part of all the leaders that I study. They will constantly talk about a moment in time and what they learned from it. And this is where it does get messy. They often share, boy, this is the worst mistake I ever made. I use an example. I used to ask in my classes how many children people have in my parenting classes. Does anybody want to know why I don't ask that anymore? Why do you think? What would be a reason that I had to stop that? Yeah. So I was at, I'll never forget, I was at a bank in Manhattan. And, this was a class on parenting. So many of the people were in, and the woman had, unfortunately, her child had been killed, had been murdered. And she taught me that what seemed like a very benign question to me, I didn't understand how many different layers there are. And so I know how difficult it is today with political correctness and saying and doing the right thing. And I am not suggesting that we get it right. I am just suggesting did I learn from that? Does it make sense to me? How do I feel about that? Let me make a note. Let me readjust. I am certainly not going to get everything right, but I'm going to try to understand where you're coming from. So we've created this compassionate commitment. If you took out the NutriBullet and you'd say, lost pregnancies, yes, all those things. that you commented on. If you take out your NutriBullet and you wanted to know the recipe for compassion, it would be, first, I would be attuned before I judge, even on a Monday. I'm going to ask everything and anything before I make any assumptions. And I know you all know that cliche, which I won't say, but doing a check in there, I will finally have the conversation that I've been avoiding. And I can't tell you how strongly I feel about that one. This year there was a lot of divisiveness around Thanksgiving and people not being at the table. And I started working with Braver Angels, and Kyle put the reference to we did a web with the CEO of Braver Angels, which you've probably seen on the news because he's in downtown Minneapolis, and with Terry Slott, who was Obama's speechwriter. And that is their whole work. Braver Angels' entire work is having the conversations with the people in your life that you really need to have before one of them is not there anymore. Holding people higher. They did a really interesting study about teachers, and they found that there were a lot of preconceived ideas in teachers. And making a long story short, this principal, who I happened to have met, and he was very frustrated with one teacher who he knew could be a better teacher. So he gave her a list of the kids in the class, and next to it were numbers, 154, 153, 148, all these different numbers. And she assumed they were IQ numbers, and she was very angry and very upset. She said, I got to redo the whole curriculum. This is crazy. After all these years, you're going to make me work so much harder. He never said a word. She had the very, very best year. Her kids scored incredibly high, to which she said, well, what did you expect? You gave me the gifted class, of course. And he said, no, those were their locker numbers. And I'm done. Self-fulfilling prophecies about what we can and can't do. I do think that what someone avoids when you try to ask and understand them better, I have to say, we are shielded. We are guarded. We are the most cynical world that we've ever been in. So I'm not surprised that someone is going to avoid the conversation, because why would they trust you in the beginning? And how do you build trust up? And so I'm going to come back. I'm going to continue. Really important to say, I am here for the long run. I also tell you, when you make a commitment to one of your team members, you tell them, I'm making a commitment. I don't want to fire you. I don't want to lay you off. I want you to be part of the team. So we're going to work on this. We're going to work on it. We're going to come back. We're probably going to go backwards a little and forwards a bit. But I understand that it's going to take you time to understand that I'm redirecting. And you have a chance to avoid the conversation, but I'm going to continue to come back to show you how much I want to make this work. Don't confuse it with lowering the bar. Don't fall down the rabbit hole of saying, I'm going to let somebody off off the hook here. It is about actions, not words. Absolutely. And, by the way, it's not always about birthdays. It's not about presents. It's not about, material things. It's really about saying, let's take a step back. And sometimes it's just acknowledging, wow, this has been really tough. Like, this is really disappointing. In our world, very often we will do something that seems impossible. We'll work so hard for a client, and then, we'll get a big spreadsheet, all perfect. I'm sure you can relate. And then the client will say, oh, never mind. Changed our minds. And we take this big drop and say, like, wow, that was really disappointing. And sometimes it's just acknowledging that's super disappointing. This is one of the topics that I really encourage you to continue on. This is just Wendy's list. I'm sure you guys can share many of your own. I love the stories of people that took this and then made it part of it. Simon Sinek, of course, is a given. He's certainly a business analyst that's used in every business school. But Hit Refresh is a fairly new book. If you follow Satya, he totally reframed Microsoft after Bill Gates. And he built the entire company on compassion. So if you want a real case study, hit refresh is probably your go-to book. And I'm a big fan of Kara Golden. If you've ever, do you know Hint Water? Anybody heard of Hint Water? Just finished one yesterday. Yep. No, yes, maybe. If you haven't heard Hint Water, it was a mother. She wanted to have an all natural water. She absolutely saw her at a conference. She literally knew nothing, but she did really focus on the zero apology and created this all natural water. A great guidebook. I'm a huge fan of the documentary Self-Made. Have you guys seen it? There's a Westchester mention, by the way. There's a Westchester, um, if you haven't seen that, I watch it a lot. These are the movies. I'm sure you all remember The Pursuit of Happiness. I can tell you that you watch it differently when you think about your role and where you play. And I think what's really important about these is that the ones that are there are where I feel compassion has gotten such a difficult rebranding is it's about raising the bar higher and higher and pushing people to their absolute potential. That is one of the most important parts about being compassionate. And there are plenty of TED Talks on this as well. The list goes on and on. I didn't want to overwhelm people, but I'm always happy to share more. I will share one that I didn't put on here, but we're running a book club for a group now. It's called The Year of Yes. If you're a Shonda Rhimes fan, of course, Shondaland, it really talks about being a yes person in terms of being more open and being more inspiring. So she spends an entire year saying yes to things, and it's her journey and why saying no is easier for her. So I think there's a lot to be said there. So I know we have a few minutes left. So I'm going to stop sharing. Thankfully, it worked a little bit. We do have more sessions coming up, so we'll talk about that in a minute. But let me stop sharing and let me invite people into comments or questions. And I think, if anything, you should feel very, very free to ask me personal questions, maybe about how I make things work, or um, or challenge me. Ask me the probing questions that I'm challenging you. That's what I was trying to do. I was looking to say.
And Wendy, if I could just add how pleased we are at the Business Council of Westchester to partner with you this year on this series. It was fabulous.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate the partnership. Hi, do you want to come on camera for a minute and talk about the next three?
Sure, of course. Hello, everybody. I just wanted to thank BCW and Wendy for this great presentation. And part of the follow-up information will include a save the date. We'll be delivering these quarterly. Really looking forward to that. In addition, I've included links to our YouTube and Wendy's LinkedIn, which offers this kind of insight daily. So keep an eye out for all that information, and please follow and engage in the conversation. And thank you all for being here.
Marcia, there's no words to say how grateful I am to you and all that I've learned from you.
Well, Wendy, BLI is amazing. And you, of course, are an amazing leader who has such a great team. But I just want to share with you today some things that I learned. When you first asked about probing questions, I gave myself an F. I really did. Because while I see myself, I think, as a compassionate person, I'm not sure that I always start from the right place, because I haven't asked the right questions. So I've absolutely learned that today. I loved talking about agility. I loved about talking about total engagement, really being there. It's harder these days with these things. Let's be honest. Show up, self-reflection. I mean, there are so many things that took away from your teaching us today, not only for our professional leadership, but for our personal life at all. And I have a little bit of a family issue going on right now with a distant cousin that I did for the first time actually address. I usually avoid these things, and I'm going to address it a little bit differently today after this seminar. So Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And Amanda, thank you so much for all your help in getting this organized. Appreciate it.
Great. And stay tuned, everyone.
Bye.
Have a great day from the Business Council of Westchester and Balancing Life's Issues.